afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today Magazine, HRO Today EMEA, and HRO Today APAC, as well as the producers of the HRO Today forums and educational events held around the world, and the managers of the HRO Today Association. Today, we're going to be talking about talent acquisition infrastructure, and we've been talking about this a lot recently, and part of this is driven by what's going on in the global economy. Now, there are a lot of companies that are out there that are talking about infrastructure and RPO and how to manage talent acquisition. One of the best is LevelUP Human Capital Solutions. LevelUP's been in existence for about 10 years. I'm thrilled to have their CEO, Curtis Grajeda, here with us. Kurt is the founder and managing partner of LevelUP, and he has been in the talent and HR industry for over 20 years. LevelUP, as many of you know, is one of the top-rated firms on the HRO Today Baker's Dozen for RPO. Kurt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Elliot. Very happy to be here today.
Is there anything you want to add about LevelUP or our audience?
So LevelUP is the largest certified minority-owned and operated total talent provider. We specialize in RPO and contract workforce management, and essentially we help our clients achieve their goals by creating sustainable talent programs that leverage the power of our people. And our people are subject matter experts who help deliver industry best practices and, of course, utilize what I call best-in-class technology. Now, I'm really proud of our growth, as we are a member of the Inc. 5000, which recognizes us as one of the fastest growing mid-sized companies in the US. Because of that growth, we're now not only in the US, but we're also providing service in Canada, in South America, as well as Europe and Asia. But even more impressive than our growth, it's the fact that for the third year in a row, we have been recognized as a great place to work. And that award is due to the feedback from our employees, with 97% providing positive review and ratings. So even during hypergrowth and the pandemic, where we all had to work basically at home, we've been able to sustain and build a culture of engagement, inclusivity, and empowerment. And when you have a happy, engaged workforce, it's going to lead to great results and, of course, positive outcomes for our clients. And I'm really proud to be able to sit here and say that as a LevelUP, we've been able to do both, provide great service and also at the same time be able to create an environment where our employees feel engaged.
You know, Kurt, you and I spoke at length, and now we're just going to let the audience listen to us having the conversations we have anyway. We've talked about the future of the RPO industry, talent acquisition, and labor economies, and we've talked about this in the past few weeks. I wanted you to share some of the observations with the audience that you and I discussed. You know, we've heard a lot about this trend in the past few years in some of the HR publications, including ours, about companies looking to bring a significant portion of their TA function in-house. And some of the other HR media outlets, have outright declared this as the wave of the future. However, when we spoke, you mentioned that most TA functions are not good at managing uncertainty. That's the word for today, uncertainty. We are entering a period of economic uncertainty. So, Kurt, you provide RPO services to lots of companies. You yourself have to manage, your own internal infrastructure on their behalf. How should companies prepare for a recession? And how can they do so effectively if they only follow this sort of insourcing model?
It's a very good question, and it's obviously very timely now with where we are in the global economic, let's say, outlook, right? But in planning for a downturn or a recession, leadership at any company needs to lead by design and not by default. Let me explain that a little bit further. When you're preparing as a leader in an organization for a recession or a downturn, it's finance 101. All companies will examine and evaluate their operating costs and, of course, their expenses. So typically, hiring dramatically slows down during a recession. And it's the reason why recruitment teams and talent acquisition budgets typically get cut or are significantly reduced. So if you think about it, the action itself definitely yields short-term value. It's lowering the expenses, but it directly creates long-term macro inefficiencies within HR and recruitment. So if you think about it, an in-source recruitment model will be challenged by the economic narratives of a slowing economy and potentially poor company performance because of the reactions, right? So again, because of this, the in-source models will constantly experience operational inefficiencies as they react to the momentary downtrends. So let's think about this a little bit further in regards to the idea of leading by design, not by default. And as a listener, if you're out there right now, if there's one thing you get from this conversation today as a leader, you need to take away and say, okay, we're going to plan, we're going to design, and we're not going to have things happen to us by default. So companies need to recognize that during a slowdown, it's the best opportunity to review and potentially enhance their talent acquisition programs. Talent has been in such high demand, recruiting has been in such high demand, and unemployment has been so low. It's created an ultra competitive environment for top talent. And recruiting has been so competitive as well, right? Because of it. So this type of manic environment really creates situation where it's just trying to stay ahead, just trying to keep your head above water. It's not conducive for what we call establishing best practices. So a slowdown actually provides the opportunity to review your talent acquisition program where you can ensure or implement best practices. So Elliot, when you think about a recruiting program and the recruitment lifecycle, I like to define it as 4 key categories, right? It's going to be the recruitment process itself, the brand, the technology, and, of course, people. So when we think about the process, this is a time for you to review and say, okay, are we competitive today? And what can we do to not just be competitive, but ensure that we meet the goals of our program? We should be designed around quality. It should be designed around the brand. So you think about your brand in a down market, it's even more important to send the right employer value proposition into that marketplace. Is your message, is your brand resonating with the candidates? Is it resonating with a diverse group of candidates? Moving from brand, you can even think about technology. It's a great chance in a downturn to really review your ATS. Is it effective? Is it efficient? The sourcing tools around the ATS, from engagement all the way through to assessment. Do you have the right tech stack to be competitive in the next upturn in the marketplace? Now, of course, tech is going to be a draw on a budget. So I'm not saying buy the technology today, but you should certainly invest the time into ensuring you have the right tech stack for the future state. Now, the most important out of all these categories are your people. And typically in a downturn or in a recession, companies cut the recruitment teams. It's necessary to be able to justify that reduction in overall headcount. And of course, to protect the net profit, right, of an organization. But this action, Elliot, or I would even define it as almost a overreaction, creates long-term infrastructure and bandwidth issues. So I'm from the position where you should do everything you can to try to protect your people or maintain your people, because you can redeploy those resources to the projects I just mentioned that will ultimately have a positive impact for, again, thinking about the next upturn in the marketplace.
It's interesting, and you made a lot of good points. But part of it, when you think about the tech stack issue as an example, you're buying technology across 20, 30, 40 different clients, you're going to have a lot of, shall we say, prerogative that companies just don't get with respect to their capital expenditures inside HR. You'll be able to do customized stuff. I don't know if the people who are advocates for trying to do all of this in-house have thought through just how difficult it is, because as soon as you finish investing in a technology, next year there's something better out there and you're falling behind the competitive curve. So it's a really good question, and you make some great points about it as you go into the downturn, thinking about how you can right-size your infrastructure. But also then we've had this problem, and we've seen it. You and I have seen this, during our careers a number of times, the bounce out. Often companies cut too hard, and they not only cut their associates, they cut their recruiting teams, and all of a sudden you're back to a growth economy, and they're not so well positioned. But we saw companies very poorly organized to deal with the bounce backs, and I'm thinking of 2002, 2010, even last year in 2021, after the pandemic shutdowns, when those internal teams shed the recruiting resources, they could not adapt to the upturns in volume. So what's the best way for companies to think through how they manage over this period of uncertainty to be ready to deal with the bounce back during a rebound economy?
So if there's a second message or takeaway that the listeners can glean from this conversation, it is be intentional and deliberate as you plan for the future. And again, let me explain. So you just hit the nail on the head. So you've got to be able to prepare for the unexpected hiring demand, the unexpected surge. If the pandemic taught us anything, Elliot, it is to be prepared and have a plan for that unexpected surge in hiring. I have so many countless examples of stories of companies, and I believe you do too, right? Of companies in the beginning of 2020 that had significantly reduced their TA teams, only to find themselves in a scenario where they had this huge amount of hiring surge in demand and they had no infrastructure to support the overall goals of talent acquisition for that year. It was a bind. So, what I would recommend, and again, going back to the concept of being intentional and deliberate as you plan, is identify an RPO partner today during the downturn, because the right partner will provide you with agility and the flexibility to scale at a moment's notice. LevelUp's on-demand RPO program was wildly successful in 20 and 21 because of that exact type of scenario where organizations had cut almost to the bare bone. All of a sudden, they had all this huge amount of demand and they didn't necessarily know how to be able to support it. And that's where we stepped in. But those conversations with a provider about identifying who is the right one should be happening right now, not when you have the pressure of demand. It's too late by then. So if you create the questions now, if you establish the relationship now, if you invest the time with your chosen partner so that they can fully understand your process, your brand, and your culture, they're going to be effective when that next upswing happens. So again, why I believe LevelUp was so successful was because we truly became a brand ambassador. And if you do it right, if you take the time and if you put forth the effort and the planning, you'll have a true partnership where your chosen vendor, your partner, will be able to go to market and truly represent your brand. So I believe, and I know that we just spoke about it, how, Elliot, there's this sentiment like, hey, insourcing is now becoming a hot topic. But I'm of the opinion that organizations do not necessarily have to commit to one methodology. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to just be insource versus outsource. Successful programs can incorporate a hybrid model. Have you seen that before, Elliot?
We've seen it lots of places, and frankly, very few companies ever outsource everything. They might outsource specific job families. They may outsource everything below the vice president level, but rarely do they outsource everything. So the question isn't whether, I've had companies tell me, Kurt, and we've talked about this, we don't outsource at all. We just use about 200 agencies to help us when we run short.
Right.
Well, that's outsourcing. It's just disorganized outsourcing. Okay?
Exactly. It's outsourcing by chaos.
Right. It's like the big joke in New York in the 60s. They cracked down on organized crime, and they did a great job. And they wound up with a rise in the crime rate because it turned out disorganized crime was worse. So you wind up going from organized outsourcing to disorganized outsourcing. Not a great model. The question isn't whether you're going to outsource at some level, because everyone has to at some level. It's where you draw that line to accommodate. And I love your point about being intentional, because if you're unintentional, you have a problem. So in terms of design, how are you working with these clients with whom you have hybrid infrastructures? How do you help them think through, okay, well, we need to hunker down for the next 12 months, but let's stay agile because we don't know what 2024 is going to look like. How are you advising them?
So it's strategic planning, right? It's the ability for us to be part of their conversations as they look towards the future in regards to hiring, in regards to their potential hiring demand. And it's also helping them look at recruitment, not just as a silo, but also a larger brushstroke of actually HR, right? So there are some other aspects of talent that we can help with, right? So for example, building their junior talent program. This is a fast track and an opportunity for them to develop resources who are already in their infrastructure already. They're already part of their organization. So build senior leadership mentor programs, right? Create effective succession planning. Recognize the gaps that you have within the succession planning and create a development roadmap for your junior program so that when the turn happens these individuals can step up and take on greater responsibilities. It's a great way to retain your staff. But then when you talk about talent acquisition and the role that we can play, besides the ability as a partner to step in at a moment's notice to be able to support demand, it's also about helping them recognize what we like to call the evergreen roles that organizations typically hire for, whether it's skill sets or positions where we can help enhance the talent pools today. So it's this concept of farming versus hunting. And during the slow times, being proactive to build talent pools to address future demand that you know, whether it's going to be today, tomorrow, or 2 years from now, that you're going to have a need for, is a smart strategic play. Too many times, it happens far too often. Recruitment takes a reactive approach to hiring, and that does not yield optimal results. Too often, the candidate pool in a reactive hiring cycle is built on active candidates, and active candidates traditionally do not represent the best quality of candidate. So instead, there's an opportunity to identify the skill sets, right? To identify the top, what I'll call bulge bracket positions an organization will have, and build a strategy to cultivate relationships that will yield best-in-class candidates. Again, going back to this concept, it's really farming versus the hunting approach.
Great points. And you could do a lot in the technology and financial services space. That hunt will always go on, and it's always hunting season because some of these hard-to-fill jobs will remain difficult even during economic downturns. Kurt, great conversation. I really appreciate it. For the folks in the audience, this is what you need to think through. And I think the analogy that Kurt used about being intentional is really, really important. Are you planning your infrastructure in a way that allows you to adapt to changing conditions over the long term? It's easy to plan for the short term. Where you get caught unawares is when your short-term plan is confronted with a deviation in the long term. Kurt, thank you so much for taking part in the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Once again, folks, Kurt Grajeda is the CEO and founder of LevelUP Human Capital Solutions, and they're one of our top-rated providers on the HRO Today Baker's Dozen. I'm Elliot Clark, CEO of HRO Today. Thank you once again for your time and attention.